Hey, welcome to HOA Karen Cases.
The knock came without warning, no lights, no shouting, just a uniform at my door, and silence behind it. Across the street, she watched, phone raised, framing my house before I ever spoke. At the meeting, my driveway filled the screen, grainy, suspicious, told like a story that had already been decided. So, I stopped explaining. I opened the file, stamped, certified, older than her version of events. When I dropped the envelope into the slot, it didn't make a sound, but it carried weight. In the hearing room, the distance between us finally had edges. Paper doesn't argue, it just holds. Now the street is quiet again. No cameras, no patrol cars, just gravel, and the line exactly where it's supposed to be. The knock didn't sound urgent. That's what caught me off guard. It came just as I sat down for dinner, grilled chicken still steaming, the sun stretching long shadows across the kitchen tile. My place had a quiet rhythm now. No screaming kids next door, no traffic hum, just the occasional squirrel dive-bombing the shed roof like it was Normandy. This house, this land, it was meant to be a reset. After years under classified ceilings and fluorescent hallways, I needed dirt under my boots and a driveway longer than a runway. That knock didn't belong. 3 slow raps. Intentional. Like someone rehearsed it. I stood without rushing, pushing my chair back as the first flicker of caution rose in my chest. The front door had a tall sidelight window, partially frosted, but just clear enough to make out the outline of a man in uniform, not a military one. Local PD. I opened the door halfway, enough to see his badge, but not enough to invite a conversation. "Evening," I said, flatly. He dipped his chin, mid-30s, squared shoulders, decent posture, not aggressive, but guarded. "Evening, sir. We had a report about unauthorized vehicle activity on this property. Just here to follow up." My mind scanned for the usual possibilities. Wildlife complaint, delivery mix-up. Maybe one of the contractors ran late. But the way he said unauthorized vehicle activity twisted the meaning. Legalese dressed in civility. "Who reported it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He hesitated just a beat too long. "Anonymous," he said, then added, almost out of habit, "but the concern was about unmarked vehicles using the driveway after dark. Sounded like it might involve federal or non-residential use." I let that sit in the air for a moment. "I'm assuming you're referring to the DOD logistics vehicles that use the lower easement twice a month," I said evenly. "That access was approved long before I bought this place, and it's recorded in the deed." He looked at me a little more closely now. "You military?" "Was, now a logistics contractor." He gave a slow nod. "Makes sense. Do you have documentation of that access?" I stepped back inside. "Wait here." In my home office, the binder was always where it needed to be. Bottom shelf, right side, labeled Property File, Ridgeway Lane. I slid out the easement packet, highlighted section, signed base liaison letter, recorded survey map with vehicle routes and time-stamped overlays. Redundant? Maybe, but necessary. When I handed the packet to him, he flipped through it with a practiced eye. "Okay," he murmured. "This matches what we usually see with federal overlay approvals." I watched his posture relax just slightly, but he still had one question left. "Just for the record, has there been any change in use? Anything new the HOA might not have seen before?" There it was, the real reason for the knock. "The HOA has never had authority over that easement," I said, "and nothing has changed, except maybe the president's patience." He closed the folder, gave a nod of acknowledgement. "All right, well, I appreciate you cooperating. We'll log the response and mark it closed unless anything else comes up." "It will," I said quietly. He gave a half smile like he didn't quite hear me, or maybe he just didn't want to know what I meant. He thanked me again and walked back to the cruiser. No flashing lights, no questions about IDs, just a routine log check. But as I closed the door behind him, the air in the house felt different, thinner, tense. I walked back to the table, chicken gone cold, fork untouched, appetite gone. The thing is, I didn't expect peace to last forever, not here. 6 months ago, when I bought this place on Ridgeway Lane, I thought I'd done everything right. researched the HOA, checked for architectural committees and community enforcement codes, even reviewed 5 years of meeting minutes before signing. Karen's name showed up in all of them. Karen, the HOA president, retired real estate agent, widow, been on the board since the subdivision broke ground in the early 2000s. The kind of person who believed proximity to the entrance gate gave her more jurisdiction than the county. Our interactions had been minimal up to that point. Her watching me from behind hedges, thin smile when we crossed paths at the mailbox, once even walking her dog past my driveway twice in the same morning. At first, I chalked it up to curiosity. Small town, new guy, different truck. But the smile never warmed, and the stares lasted longer than they should. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Until tonight. Because the officer may have said anonymous, but only one person in this neighborhood has ever been bold enough to imply base access equals trespass. And Karen had just shown her hand, through a third party with a badge and a clipboard. I pulled out my phone, opened the security app. Nothing caught on my cameras, too wide a lens. The cruiser never crossed the trip line, and the last base vehicle had used the easement 3 days ago. Broad daylight, fully marked, slow moving, standard stuff. But I did find something else. A still frame from 2 days prior. Karen standing across the street, arms crossed, phone aimed directly at my truck. Time stamped 7:12 p.m. I saved it to a new folder, named it Surveillance 1. I knew this wasn't the last move. Later that night, I sat on the back porch, boots up on the railing, glass of iced tea sweating beside me. I stared out toward the dark tree line where the easement split off, half gravel, half compacted dirt, winding down into the brush. That route was more than just a shortcut for base logistics. It was a link to the work I still believed in. Quiet coordination, behind-the-scenes operations. No headlines, no flags, just precision and trust. Karen saw something different. She saw intrusion, movement she couldn't control, vehicles she couldn't identify, authority that didn't answer to her, and that scared her. She didn't care about safety or traffic or aesthetics. She cared about power, and calling the police wasn't a mistake. It was a probe, a test, one that almost worked, almost. The next morning, I typed a brief statement summarizing the visit, included the officer's badge number, the reason given, and a summary of my response. I attached copies of the documentation I'd shown him, plus a screenshot of Karen on the sidewalk. Then I emailed it to myself, to my lawyer, and to the HOA board email address. I didn't accuse, I didn't escalate, I documented. Because if Karen was going to play with shadows and whispers, I was going to use the one thing she couldn't manipulate, the record. Let her file another complaint. Let her plant rumors about classified vehicles and foreign plates. She could spin whatever she wanted, but the moment she put it in writing, I'd be ready. The first knock came at dusk. The next one wouldn't be a surprise, and I'd make sure Karen knew this driveway doesn't lead where she thinks it does. It leads right back to her. I moved in on a Thursday, not for any particular reason, just how the dates lined up. The moving truck arrived mid-morning. A contractor buddy of mine helped unload. Nothing flashy, a few tool chests, some framed awards from back in my Air Force days, an old couch, and the kind of coffee maker that looks like it belongs in a flight line break room. I didn't need much, just space, privacy, and peace. The first few days, I barely saw anyone. The neighborhood was neat, unnervingly quiet. Trimmed lawns, concrete driveways scrubbed clean. Every house had the same pale stone veneer and matching porch lights, like someone had clicked subdivision on a design template and hit repeat. I didn't mind it. I wasn't here for the social life. I was here to exhale. And then I saw her. Karen. First time was on day 3. I was mounting a tool rack in the garage when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone walking her dog along the far side of the street, slow and deliberate. She wasn't looking at the dog. She was looking at my truck. That's how it always starts, isn't it? Not with words, but with the stare. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just paused a second too long near the edge of my lot, head tilted, eyes squinting like she was studying a blueprint. I gave a polite nod, nothing back. At the time, I figured she was just curious. New homeowner, government plates, Not exactly the usual suburban accessory, but looking back now, with everything that's happened, I know that moment was something else. It wasn't curiosity. It was reconnaissance. The house I'd bought sat on the far side of the development, up against a narrow utility corridor that hadn't been paved, just graded into a gravel access road. According to the county records and my title file, it served as a dual-use right-of-way, maintenance access for underground lines, and a secondary DOD logistics path approved decades ago, long before Ridgeway Lane even existed. That trail was why I bought the place. I'd spent over 20 years tied to military infrastructure, first in uniform, then as a civilian contractor coordinating supply chains and emergency route access. When the chance came to buy a home with a property line that backed up to an active base corridor, I didn't hesitate. I'd reviewed the documents myself. My real estate attorney had too. The easement was real, recorded, and still active. The base had even updated their agreement with me before closing. Everything was signed, sealed, and archived. But I kept that detail quiet at first, because I know how people react to words like military access and federal authorization. They imagine helicopters landing, tanks rolling through their hydrangeas. They forget that logistics is quiet, precise, boring even. Karen, though? Karen never forgot anything that might threaten her control. We officially met 2 weeks after I moved in. I was pressure washing the driveway when I saw her walking up, this time without the dog. She had a folder in one hand, a coffee mug in the other, and the same tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be the new owner at 212, she said, already halfway onto my property line. "That's me," I replied, shutting off the sprayer. "I'm Karen, HOA president," she added, as if that carried federal weight. "Just thought I'd say hello. Make sure you're settling in all right." I thanked her, kept my tone neutral. She glanced around. "That a government vehicle?" she asked, nodding toward my truck in the shade. "Contractor logistics," I said. "For the base?" I shrugged. "Sometimes." Her smile thinned further. "We try to maintain a residential feel around here. Some of the neighbors get jumpy about official-looking things." It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Still, I kept it courteous. "Understood." She lingered another beat too long. Then, "You'll want to review the HOA handbook. We've had issues before with trailers. Heavy vehicles, things like that?" "I have the handbook," I replied. "I've read it." That's when I saw her eyes narrow. Not an offense, but calculation. Like she'd just been told she might not be the smartest person in the room. She nodded once more and left without another word. Over the next month, she walked past often. Always slow, always alone. Her phone would be out, screen angled toward my house. One morning, I spotted her pausing at the edge of the easement, staring at the back fence like she could see through it. Then came the first violation notice, a pale yellow slip tucked neatly into my mailbox. Reminder, driveway parking is to remain free of work-related signage and oversized equipment. My truck was clean, no signage, and the equipment was a standard-duty contractor trailer rated within the HOA's size limit. I didn't respond. A week later, another note. Residents are reminded to avoid commercial appearances that detract from the visual harmony of the community. Still unsigned. But I didn't need a signature to know who sent them. I started asking around, quietly. A neighbor down the street, retired teacher, kept to himself, offered a piece of advice over the fence one afternoon. "If Karen sees you do something once, it's a warning. If you do it twice, she'll try to write you out of the bylaws." Another neighbor was less subtle. "Just keep your head down. She likes things her way. Always has." But I wasn't interested in starting a feud. I didn't move here to fight. I moved here to breathe, to finish contracts quietly, to work from home, keep my overhead low, and live in a place where no one expected me to shave every day. Still, something about Karen's behavior stuck with me. It wasn't the notices. It was the way she delivered them, personally, at odd hours, folded neatly into the fence gate or wedged under a wiper blade, not mailed, not emailed, placed. There was control in it, deliberate contact. She wasn't documenting infractions, she was asserting presence. Around month 4, I started noticing the way she talked to other neighbors. Polite enough, but clipped, calculated. Everything revolved around compliance, the shape of hedges, the color of mulch. even how long a garden hose could stay on the lawn. She had the energy of someone who'd read the rule book and memorized it, not because she believed in order, but because it gave her leverage. Then came the town newsletter, distributed HOA-wide, printed in black and white, thin paper folded into thirds. Buried in a paragraph near the bottom was a line: residents are reminded that Ridgeway Lane remains a residential-only zone, and any federal or government-aligned activity must be reported to the board immediately. No names, no incidents cited, but it didn't need either. I took the newsletter and added it to a manila folder, labeled it Karen, Phase 1. Inside went the violation notes, a few time-stamped photos of her near the fence line, and a printed screenshot of the HOA's own bylaws regarding easement jurisdiction. I didn't send anything yet. I didn't confront her, because Karen wanted confrontation. She wanted me to make the first loud move so she could claim she was just doing her duty. I had no interest in playing her script, not yet. Still, I felt it, that slow erosion of peace, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that hums in the background like a loose electrical wire you can't quite see, but you know it's hot. The kind that keeps you second-guessing simple things, backing your truck in too late, leaving the trailer hitched overnight, accepting a base drop-off at 5 p.m. instead of 2. That was her strategy. Attrition. Make me paranoid, make me nervous, make me leave. But she miscalculated one thing. I didn't buy this house to escape rules. I bought it because I knew exactly which ones couldn't be changed. And Karen, for all her meetings and memos, had no idea the easement she wanted to erase was signed by people who outranked her by 3 branches and 30 years. She thought she was the gatekeeper. She never realized the gate didn't belong to her. And soon she was going to find out. My silence wasn't fear. It was restraint. The first camera showed up without warning. It was a small dome-style model, white casing, night vision LEDs, mounted just beneath the eaves of Karen's garage, tilted ever so slightly toward my driveway. Not my house, not my windows, just the gravel stretch leading from the street to my gate. I noticed it while checking my mail one morning. Her garage door was up. She was nowhere in sight, and the new lens glared in the morning sun like an open eye. I stood there for a long second, mail in hand, pulse steady. It wasn't illegal, not technically, but it wasn't accidental either. The angle was intentional. The message was clear. I'm watching. By the end of the week, I counted 2 more. One perched at the corner of her back porch, aimed low and wide, covering the utility corridor near my easement gate. Another, mounted on a freestanding pole that hadn't existed a month ago, tucked behind a cluster of ornamental shrubs at the edge of her lot line. It faced east, right toward where the base trail met my property's rear slope. 3 cameras, no warnings, no notices, just quiet surveillance. I started photographing them, wide shots, close-ups, time-stamped, labeled each one by location, angle, and date discovered. I added them to the manila folder labeled Karen, Phase 1. And then I made a new one, Phase 2. The next HOA notice arrived that Friday, folded, creased neatly into my gate latch. Reminder: trailers may not remain visible for more than 24 hours within any 7-day period. It cited Section 6.3 of the HOA Charter, without context, of course. I knew that rule. It applied to idle commercial trailers parked on the street. Mine was backed into my own drive, wheels chalked, in compliance. No rule broken. Still, it went into the file. Later that night, I spotted Karen walking her dog again. No leash, no bags, just a lazy stroll timed precisely with the base truck's scheduled entry. I'd sent the clearance text to the base's logistics point of contact earlier that afternoon. The vehicle, an unmarked supply runner, came up the easement slow, no headlights, dust trailing behind it like a whisper. Karen stopped mid-sidewalk, phone already raised. She didn't bother hiding it this time, just filmed. Then she smiled, a tight pleased smirk, like she'd finally caught something worth keeping. The next morning, the flyer appeared, printed on cheap copy paper, sloppily folded, and slipped under a few mailboxes up and down the street. Mine was tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. In bold type, security risk? Are federal vehicles using your neighborhood for undisclosed activity? Below the headline was a blurry black and white photo, clearly pulled from one of Karen's cameras, of my driveway with a supply runner midway through backing out. There was no HOA letterhead, no contact info, just vague warnings about unmonitored access and community safety. I turned it over. Nothing on the back, just fear in paper form. I took it inside, photographed it, then shredded it. The smear campaign had begun. That evening, I got a message from a neighbor. A guy named Aaron lived 3 doors down with 2 toddlers and a wife who taught 3rd grade. He'd never reached out before. His email was short. Just a heads up, Karen's been telling people you're leasing part of your lot to the government. Said it's not properly zoned for what you're doing. I figured that sounded off. Let me know if you need someone to back you up. Attached was a screenshot of a Facebook group thread, Ridgeway Community Strong, where Karen had posted a cryptic comment about federal activities slipping through our HOA cracks. It didn't mention my name, but the comment directly referenced my address. That night, I installed my own cameras. Not many, just enough. One pointed at the driveway entrance, another covering the mailbox, a third mounted near the rear fence line facing the easement. All legal, all with signs posted. This property is monitored by video surveillance. I wasn't trying to start a war. I was fortifying the perimeter. Karen had escalated. She'd crossed the line from passive-aggressive policy policing into active defamation. And I wasn't going to let her do it in the dark. 3 days later, I got a call from a base contractor I worked with, Derek, a logistics handler, who'd done 3 tours before joining civil ops. He sounded irritated. "Your HOA lady tried to stop me," he said. "What?" "Middle-aged woman, short haircut, sunglasses. Said she was the HOA president. Asked what I was doing on private infrastructure. Demanded ID, said I was trespassing. Where? Right at the mouth of the trail, just past your lot line. I told her I had clearance and she said, that doesn't matter here. Tried to take a picture of my plates. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, vision narrowing. Did you report it? Yeah, logged it with the base liaison. She might have put herself on a list she didn't mean to. Send me a statement? Already typed it up. I read his incident report twice before printing it. Clear, factual, time-stamped. It documented not just her interference, but her false claim of authority on a federal use trail. It went into the binder, right next to the flyer, right after the photo of her smile. This wasn't about easements anymore. It wasn't even about the base. This was Karen doing what people like her always do when they lose control. They escalate. They create panic, then position themselves as the solution. She thought if she painted me as a threat, quiet, subtle, unnerving, then her rules would feel like safety. And she wasn't just targeting me, she was shaping the narrative for everyone else. So, I started writing. A full incident log. Each day, each camera sighting, each violation notice, each third-party report. I cataloged everything: date, time, location, source. I drafted a summary cover sheet and clipped it to the top. Then, I printed 5 clean copies, one for my files, one for the base, one for the HOA board, one for my lawyer, and one for the county oversight division. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I always knew I'd need it. The paper trail. Not just the signed deed or the glossy survey printout the realtor handed me at closing, but the real documentation. The stack of cross-referenced easements, service agreements, and old municipal overlays that nobody ever reads until they're backed into a corner. Karen had backed me into one. I just didn't think she'd do it this fast. It was late, nearly midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the whir of my printer and the soft creak of my chair as I leaned over the desk, flipping pages under the pale light of a single desk lamp. The binder sat open beside me. Ridgeway property, easement and title docs. Most people never even see these pages, let alone understand them. But I wasn't most people. 20 years working infrastructure for the military had trained me to respect the fine print. Sometimes the only thing standing between authority and overreach is a clause that nobody noticed, but someone signed. I was banking on that now. I started with the purchase file, page 12, parcel YD, number 137-05-441. I double-checked it against the plat map I'd pulled from the county site. The borders matched. Property edge ran along the old utility corridor, now used as a gravel access trail for maintenance, and, more recently, low-visibility base logistics vehicles. Karen kept calling it a road. But it wasn't a road. It was a recorded dual-use utility easement, and legally, that was a different beast entirely. I flipped further back, scanning through the original grant language from the 1998 development filing. There it was. Section 3.2, subsection F. The property shall retain utility easement rights for maintenance access, including ingress/egress by federal and emergency vehicles, as authorized under logistical cooperation agreements with the U.S. Department of Defense or its contractors. Right of use is perpetual and non-revocable by any private covenant, including homeowners associations, and shall be maintained by the deed holder unless otherwise specified. I let out a slow breath and sat back in the chair. She didn't know. Karen had weaponized bylaws, flyers, fear, and surveillance. But she didn't know about this. At closing, I remembered signing a supplemental document recertifying easement acknowledgments. At the time, it felt like routine paperwork, a formality. Now, it felt like armor. I located the scanned version in my digital archive, signed by me, notarized, with a current map overlay from the base confirming active status. The route was clearly marked, touching the back edge of my property and listed as an alternate logistics corridor, ALC-3B. Not used daily, not public-facing, but real and entirely legal. Next, I cross-referenced the county recorder's site, just to be sure. Within minutes, I found the file number, scanned into the public archive, time-stamped with the 1998 land use approval, and updated with my name in the property change log from 6 months ago. I saved it all, PDFs, screenshots, date confirmations, then I printed, then I highlighted. Karen wanted a target. She just gave me a map. The next morning, I drove into town. It was one of those pale gray mornings that never fully burns off. Sky the color of old concrete, air cool, the sun hiding behind clouds like it didn't want to be involved in what I was about to do. The county building wasn't much, just 3 stories of brick and tinted windows. I found the recorder's office on the 2nd floor and asked for copies of any easement-related documents tied to my parcel. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a cracked leather chair, keyed in the number and pulled it up. "Looks like you've got a dual recorded easement," she said, clicking through the EA tabs. "One tied to utilities, one military. Not common, but it's valid." I nodded. "Can I get certified copies?" "Sure, might take 10 minutes. I sat down and waited, watched the elevator doors open and close. A man walked past in a polo shirt, carrying blueprints. Somewhere down the hall, a printer jammed. When she returned, she handed me the documents, clipped together, seal-stamped, official. "You expecting trouble?" she asked casually. I smiled. "Not expecting, just confirming." By the time I got home, I had a folder thick with signatures, timestamps, and maps, every piece of proof I'd ever need. The legal line was clear, the easement was real, the use was approved, the HOA had zero say. Karen's war had been built on ignorance, and now I held the one document she couldn't vote out of existence. I spent the afternoon putting together a response packet, not for Karen, not yet. This was for the HOA board, 3 simple pieces. A, short cover letter, neutral tone, formal language, no emotion. A copy of the easement clause with highlighted sections. The updated DoD logistics overlay with signature from the base liaison. I didn't accuse, I didn't threaten, I just informed, because Karen wanted the board to see me as a problem. I wanted them to see the truth. But I wasn't done. That night, I sent an email to my base contact, Major Sutton, a liaison I'd coordinated with for the better part of a year. I gave him a brief summary of what had happened so far, attached copies of the HOA flyers, the surveillance images, and a description of Karen's interference with the base contractor on the easement. He replied within 3 hours. "This is the 3rd local HOA incident in the past year involving unauthorized citizen interference with base operations. Send me all related materials. Legal will respond directly if needed." Then a follow-up. "By the way, her name came up in our security log last month. Unverified civilian encounter near the perimeter. I'll flag it." I leaned back in my chair, fingers laced behind my head. Karen had poked the wrong bear, and now she wasn't just on my radar, she was on theirs. Funny thing about people like her, They're so used to being the final authority in their little kingdoms that they never imagine someone might hold documentation older, stronger, and more binding than any HOA covenant. Karen thought the rules were hers to bend. She forgot some rules are carved in stone. And this easement? It wasn't just a line in a file. It was a boundary she had no power to cross. But she'd already stepped over it. Now, it was just a matter of showing her the map. It was folded like a wedding invitation. Perfect edges, heavy paper stock, hand-delivered with just enough precision to make it feel important. No envelope, just a trifold page, slid cleanly under my storm door. Mid-morning, I spotted it as I stepped outside with my coffee in hand. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, and already the day had a tone to it. Still, dry air, birds quiet, like the whole street was waiting for something to happen. I crouched down, picked it up, and unfolded it slowly. The HOA header sat at the top. Ridgeway Residential Association Compliance Committee. The font looked like something out of a government playbook, bolded and sterile. Then came the subject line. Subject, notice of non-compliance, unauthorized military activity and land use violation. I didn't react, not right away. My brain just noted the phrasing, filed it next to every other absurdity Karen had managed to dream up. But then I read further. This letter serves as formal notice that your property at 212 Ridgeway Lane is under investigation for unauthorized non-residential use, including, but not limited to, leasing portions of the parcel to a federal entity without board disclosure or approval. It continued, paragraph after paragraph of bluster and legal-sounding nonsense. Something about violations of the Ridgeway Harmony Code, misuse of shared ingress routes, and the possibility of sanctions or legal action if immediate correction wasn't undertaken. And at the bottom, in big self-important script, sincerely, Karen, redacted president, Ridgeway HOA. I read it twice, not because it was convincing, but because I needed to understand just how wrong she was. Then I saw it. Midway through the document, in the description of parcel activity section, Karen had listed the property ID, parcel ID, number 137-05-414. I blinked. That wasn't my parcel. Mine was number 137-05-441. She'd flipped two numbers, referred to a vacant lot 2 doors down that hadn't been developed yet. She was accusing me of leasing military land use on a property I didn't even own. I laughed. It wasn't bitter. It was genuine. A bark of disbelief at how sloppy it all was. Karen wanted so badly to make this look official, so badly to scare me into reacting, that she hadn't even verified the basic property ID. And that mistake, that was gold, because it told me something more important than anything the letter said outright. Karen wasn't just acting without authority. She was acting without information. Still, the letter was a threat. Badly written, legally toothless, and hilariously flawed, but a threat nonetheless. I took it inside, placed it under the scanner, and made 3 digital copies. Then I opened my file system and dropped it into the folder. Karen, Phase 2. I added a new tag, HOA, overreach, active. My next call was to Roland Pierce, my land use attorney. He picked up after 2 rings. "You get a love letter?" he asked, half amused. "Just read it. You'll enjoy the parcel number." I emailed it over. 2 minutes later, he called me back. "She's a genius," he deadpanned. "She just accused you of violating HOA code on a vacant lot. Think she even knows? She will when the county starts asking about fraudulent notices." We spent the next hour drafting a response. Not emotional, not aggressive, just firm. A formal rebuttal on legal letterhead that corrected the parcel number, declared the HOA's lack of authority over federal easement use, attached certified documentation of the easement, included the signed base operations letter confirming approval, and finally, a direct instruction to cease and desist from further defamatory communications involving my name, my property, or my work with the base. We CC'd the HOA board, the county oversight division, and the base liaison, and I hand-delivered it myself. It was mid-afternoon when I walked the sealed envelope to the HOA drop box mounted near the community park entrance. Karen was there, Of course she was. Tennis shoes, yoga pants, clipboard tucked under her arm like she was heading to a neighborhood census. Her dog trailed behind on a retractable leash, completely uninterested. She saw the envelope and smiled like she'd won. "More questions about the letter?" she said, sipping her iced coffee. "I'm happy to clarify anything, or you can just comply and avoid all that mess." Her voice was syrupy, meant for witnesses. I didn't give her the pleasure. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone measured, "just submitting a response. I'd suggest reading it carefully this time. You cited the wrong property." She blinked. "Excuse me?" I slid the envelope into the drop box, let it land with a satisfying clunk. "You accused the wrong lot, Karen." Her lips tightened. "We're looking into all related parcels. That's not how property law works." I turned and walked away before she could reply. Not fast, not dramatic, just done. Let her stew. That evening, I drafted an incident summary and added it to the HOA master complaint log. Title: Karen's letter. Fraudulent parcel. Notice keynotes: incorrect parcel number, misuse of HO. A letterhead for legal threats. No verification of claims. Violation of HOA Charter on formal notices. Attachments: scanned copy of the letter, my response, and the parcel mismatch map from the county site. And that might have been it for the week. Except the next morning, something changed. Not visibly, not overtly. But there was a tension in the air. The kind that shows up in how neighbors close their blinds an inch faster when you drive by. The way a conversation at the mailbox stops just before you arrive. The feeling that people are waiting. For what? They're not sure. But they're expecting something. Karen had started the next phase. Rumor. Not flyers, not notices, just stories. "Did you hear he's leasing his land? I heard there were black trucks. I heard he's using military connections to bypass the HOA. None of it said to me directly, all of it within earshot. She didn't need to prove anything. She just needed enough people afraid of what they didn't understand. So I doubled down. I added a small sign to the gate. Private easement, logistics, vehicle access, by federal agreement, do not obstruct, legal, factual, measured. And I posted a copy of the actual easement, highlighted, laminated, inside a weatherproof display case at the edge of my drive. Not for Karen, for the neighbors. Because truth, once visible, is hard to unsee. And Karen's about to learn what happens when fear meets paperwork. She came at me with a demand letter. I came back with every clause she never bothered to read. The envelope Roland used wasn't flashy. Cream stock, no logo, just his name printed small and neat in the return corner. But the contents? That was the loudest thing in the neighborhood all week. Inside was a 7-page response to Karen's letter, folded, signed, and stitched together with enough legal precedent to paper the inside of her little rulebook binder. It wasn't aggressive, that was the point. It was precise. And precision, as I've learned, is how you gut a narrative without ever raising your voice. Roland met me at his office that Monday morning, second floor of a red brick professional building on the edge of town. His space smelled like legal pads and confidence. Certificates lined the wall, a massive overwatered ficus guarded the window. He waved me in without fanfare. "Got your folder," he said, "and your neighbor's ego trip disguised as a complaint." He dropped a stapled packet on the desk between us. "Karen wants attention. We'll give her the kind that comes with consequences." We reviewed the original notice together. He flipped through it with theatrical slowness. "Accusing you of leasing to a federal agency. No proof, no statute, wrong parcel." He tapped his pen. "And signed by her alone, without board vote authorization. That right there? Overreach, possibly even abusive position if we're dealing with a non-profit HOA. I nodded, watching him scribble margin notes in clean, looping cursive. Roland wrote like someone who knew every line might be quoted later. "She's using the HOA as a bludgeon," I said. "Worse," he replied. "She's using it as a mask. But masks come off during formal inquiries." He paused, looked up. "We're not just sending her a letter. We're documenting every legal misstep and copying the county oversight board. This needs sunlight." By noon, the packet was done. Page 1. A calm but firm summary of facts. Pages 2 through 4. Direct citations of the easement, the bases approved corridor use, and relevant property statutes. Page 5, a request for immediate written confirmation from the HOA acknowledging their overstep. Page 6, a cease and desist order detailing the false accusations, flyers, surveillance, and baseless escalation. Page 7, a courtesy reminder that continued harassment could result in a civil claim. We signed, we sealed, we made 5 copies. The original would go straight to Karen via the HOA Dropbox. The rest, 1 to the HOA board, 1 to the county HOA oversight division, 1 to the base's legal liaison, 1 for my records. The 5th, Roland kept for what he called round 2. That same afternoon, I reached out to the base. Major Sutton answered on the first ring. He sounded sharper than usual, measured, professional, with that clipped cadence I remembered from briefings. "I'm guessing you saw the flyers," I said. "I did," he replied. "And the contractor statement from Derek. That report didn't go unnoticed." There was a pause. "She claimed to be the infrastructure gatekeeper for the HOA," he continued. "Intercepted a cleared vehicle and attempted to restrict access to an approved corridor. Any legal movement on your side?" I asked. "We're preparing a formal letter," he said. "Our legal office will address it directly to the HOA. We'll CC you and the county. Include language on the easement rights, direct citations and authorization codes. If she escalates after this, it becomes obstruction." 3 days later, the letter arrived, stamped with a Department of Defense header, signed by Lieutenant Colonel Thomas, and reviewed by the base legal team. It was 2 pages, tight and indisputable. The Ridgeway Lane corridor currently under scrutiny is a federally acknowledged access route, recorded under Logistical Corridor ALC 3B and approved for periodic contractor use. Any civilian interference or attempt to restrict such access, whether by verbal confrontation, written notice, or obstructive physical behavior, may result in legal referral. There it was, in black and white. The boundary Karen crossed, named and outlined by someone 10 pay grades above her. I attached the letter to the growing binder and delivered it personally, once again, into the HOA Dropbox. This time, I didn't expect a thank you. I expected silence, which is exactly what I got. But silence can be strategic. 2 days later, I learned Karen had called an executive session with the board. No agenda posted, no email sent to members. One of the board members, a quiet guy named Matt, I'd nodded to at meetings but never spoken to, sent me a message. "Just FYI, Karen's trying to stall. Said the complaint against you requires legal review. She's not showing the board the DOD letter." I replied, "Thanks, Oversight Division already has it." Because they did. I'd already submitted everything, every letter, every screenshot, every dated document to the county's complaint portal. And 2 days later, I got a call. His name was Jerome Lynn, investigator with the county HOA Oversight Division. Dry voice, but sharp. I could tell within the first 2 minutes. This wasn't his first Karen. "Mr. Briggs," he began, "I've reviewed your file. Quite thorough. Appreciate that. Miss Karen Dalton has been the subject of prior informal advisories. Nothing escalated to formal action until now. That told me everything I needed. I didn't have to win the board. I just had to hold the line long enough for someone with teeth to start asking questions she couldn't ignore." Jerome filed a request to the HOA board for meeting minutes from the vote on my violation, any board correspondence relating to my easement, a copy of the community-wide notice policy, and proof of legal review before the emergency vote was called. Karen's reply came 4 days later, through the board secretary, vague, stalling, claimed some documents were misplaced and the vote had been informal, pending review. Jerome forwarded the reply to me with a single comment: footprints behind it. Across the street, she watched, phone raised, framing my house before I ever spoke. At the meeting, my driveway filled the screen, grainy, suspicious, told like a story that had already been decided. So, I stopped explaining. I opened the file, stamped, certified, older than her version of events. When I dropped the envelope into the slot, it didn't make a sound, but it carried weight. In the hearing room, the distance between us finally had edges. Paper doesn't argue, it just holds. Now the street is quiet again. No cameras, no patrol cars, just gravel, and the line exactly where it's supposed to be. The knock didn't sound urgent. That's what caught me off guard. It came just as I sat down for dinner, grilled chicken still steaming, the sun stretching long shadows across the kitchen tile. My place had a quiet rhythm now. No screaming kids next door, no traffic hum, just the occasional squirrel dive-bombing the shed roof like it was Normandy. This house, this land, it was meant to be a reset. After years under classified ceilings and fluorescent hallways, I needed dirt under my boots and a driveway longer than a runway. That knock didn't belong. 3 slow raps. Intentional. Like someone rehearsed it. I stood without rushing, pushing my chair back as the first flicker of caution rose in my chest. The front door had a tall sidelight window, partially frosted, but just clear enough to make out the outline of a man in uniform, not a military one. Flatly. He dipped his chin, mid-30s, squared shoulders, decent posture, not aggressive, but guarded. "Evening, sir. We had a report about unauthorized vehicle activity on this property. Just here to follow up." My mind scanned for the usual possibilities. Wildlife complaint, delivery mix-up. Maybe one of the contractors ran late. But the way he said unauthorized vehicle activity twisted the meaning. Legalese dressed in civility. Outside, the air was cool. The sky was turning that soft shade of purple that only comes after a long, dry day. I walked back to my truck, slid the folder into the passenger seat, and exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but tonight, I hadn't just defended myself. I'd exposed her. And now, Karen had a room full of witnesses, and a very real problem she couldn't manage with flyers and camera angles. I showed up 5 minutes early, which meant I was already 10 minutes late in Karen's world. The HOA meeting had moved to the Ridgeway Community Room, a modest building at the edge of the park with fluorescent lights, concrete floors, and folding chairs that scream municipal budget. It was the kind of room you rented for birthday parties when you couldn't afford a bounce house. Tonight, it felt like a courtroom. The projector was already on. The HOA board sat at a long table up front. 5 members, 1 microphone, and at the center of it, all Karen. She wore navy, a binder in front of her, posture military straight, clipboard on her lap like a gavel. She wasn't just here to run a meeting. She was here to win something, and I had no doubt I was the prize. A stack of printed agendas sat on a folding table near the door. I took one. The title was Boilerplate, Ridgeway, HO. A monthly board meeting, agenda. But halfway down the list, in bold font, community review of parcel 137-05-441. They weren't even hiding it anymore. My parcel number, my driveway, my name, omitted but obvious. I sat near the back, 1 row from the wall, binder in hand. Around me, maybe 25 neighbors filled the chairs. Most were silent. A few gave polite nods. Most didn't look at me at all. But the air buzzed with something I hadn't felt before. Tension that wasn't just mine. Karen had stirred the pot, and tonight, people had come expecting a mess. The meeting opened with the usual pageantry. Budget, updates, committee reports, talk of repainting the speed bumps. Karen spoke crisply, controlled. Her voice carried authority that hadn't yet been questioned, until agenda item 5. Next, Karen said, sliding a paper in front of her, "We'll address ongoing concerns raised by multiple residents regarding activities occurring on parcel 137-05-441. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She clicked a remote. The projector screen behind the board lit up with a blurry still frame of my driveway, a contractor truck halfway down the gravel, hauling a small covered trailer, time-stamped, cropped tight, probably pulled straight from one of her surveillance cameras. Then another photo. This one was worse. A federal logistics vehicle, base approved, caught exiting the rear easement, dust trailing behind it. Completely legal, but out of context. It looked like something secret, exactly what she wanted. Karen turned to face the room, voice laced with faux concern. We understand that several neighbors have expressed discomfort with the frequency and nature of traffic entering and exiting this particular parcel. Reports of blacked-out vehicles, increased non-residential activity, and what appears to be contractor operations have prompted the board to review whether current use aligns with Ridgeway's residential standards. No names, no direct accusations, just an avalanche of suggestion. She was playing her game with surgical precision. I stood up before she could keep going, calmly, quietly. Board permission to respond? I asked, addressing the president, not her. He nodded. Karen didn't. I walked to the front, opened my binder, and placed several folders on the table. Then I faced the room. My name is Thomas Briggs, I said. I own parcel 137-05-441. I've lived here for 6 months. And everything you've just seen, those photos, those vehicles, those routes, has been legally authorized under a federal easement that predates this HOA by over 2 decades. I clicked open the first folder and held up the map. Easement corridor highlighted. Signatures from the base and county included. This easement, ALC 3B, was created in 1998 and reaffirmed in 2023 at the time of purchase. It permits Controlled Department of Defense contractor access via the rear corridor. That access is not subject to HOA regulation and cannot be revoked or altered by vote. I turned back to the board. You have copies of this documentation already. So does the base. So does County Council. Karen shifted in her seat, lips pursed. She didn't like losing the room. I kept going. What you haven't seen, I said, flipping to another page, are the flyers distributed anonymously around this neighborhood. Flyers with my address, falsely suggesting I'm involved in unauthorized federal operations. You haven't seen the surveillance photos taken from private cameras aimed directly at my property, or the report from a base contractor who was stopped and questioned by someone claiming to have legal authority they didn't. I paused. Let the silence land. Those documents are here too, and they're available to any resident who wants the truth, not the fear. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone in the third row raised their hand. So wait, this is all legal? I nodded. Certified by the county recorder's office, reconfirmed by the Department of Defense. Every document stamped, signed, and on record. Another voice from the far left. So why are we being told it's a problem? Karen finally broke. Because it is a problem, she snapped. This is a residential neighborhood, not a federal hub. The HOA was never consulted about any of this. That's the issue. No, I said, turning to her. The issue is that you assumed authority you don't have, and when you realized you couldn't stop the access legally, you tried to create pressure socially. You used fear, you used rumors, and you used this board to carry out a campaign against one homeowner under the guise of policy. Karen's face flushed. The board president cleared his throat. Let's stick to facts. Karen raised her voice again, ignoring him. Residents have the right to safety. I nodded slowly. And safety starts with facts, not flyers. That was the breaking point. A man in the back stood up. I've lived here 10 years. If there's a legal easement and you've got nothing on paper to counter it, then what exactly are we doing here? Another voice joined him. Feels like a personal issue, not a policy one. Karen looked around, realizing, perhaps for the first time, she was no longer the only voice in the room. The board president motioned for calm. Based on tonight's information, the board is not taking any action at this time. This matter is tabled until County Council completes its review. He turned to me. Mr. Briggs, thank you for your clarity. I nodded, returned to my seat. Karen said nothing, but her posture had changed, rigid, tight, binder closed. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to me. Consequences. The letter I submitted to the County HOA Oversight Division was simple. 12 pages, 3 attachments, 0 emotion, just facts, timelines, documentation, every false violation, every officer's visit, every camera placement, flyer, and emergency vote. Karen tried to weaponize. I submitted it at 9:43 a.m. on a Monday. By 4:15, I had a reply. Your complaint has been accepted. A case has been opened and assigned to investigator Jerome Lynn. You will be contacted within 48 hours. Karen had finally triggered something she couldn't outmaneuver. Jerome called the next morning. Steady voice, professional, no wasted words. This isn't the first Ridgeway file we've opened, he said, and it's not the first time Karen's name has appeared on a complaint. That didn't surprise me, but hearing it out loud, that meant everything. He laid it out clean. He was launching a formal investigation into Ridgeway's HOA governance, specifically how Karen had executed and enforced HOA actions without board consent, due process, or legal grounding. He asked for every document I had. I told him I'd already printed and indexed them. Then he said something I didn't expect. I need to warn you. In most of these cases, once we step in, it gets worse before it gets better. I nodded into the phone. She's already scattered roofing nails. I'm past the gets worse stage. 3 days later, the first request for records hit the HOA inbox. I was CC'd. Jerome had submitted a formal demand for all HOA board meeting minutes from the last 6 months, email communications relating to my parcel, or the easement copies of any formal violations issued. A legal justification for the emergency vote. Karen tried to call. Karen didn't respond directly, but the board did. An email came from the Ridgeway HOA general account. Due to a misfiling of several documents and recent administrative turnover, there may be a delay in producing all requested materials. We appreciate your patience. Translation: Karen's stalling. She's either shredding or scrambling. Either way, Jerome wasn't buying it. A week later, Jerome requested a formal hearing. I would present my case. Karen would present hers. The board would be required to attend. Meanwhile, Major Sutton from the base sent his own letter. The parcel in question is under documented easement protection for logistical use. Attempts to obstruct or redefine access terms have been noted. Any future interference will be escalated through base legal. He copied me. He copied the board, and, most importantly, he copied the county. That was the first time the board went silent. I wasn't naive. I knew Karen wouldn't back off just because a county investigator was involved. But what she didn't realize, what people like her never do, is that systems built on intimidation collapse the moment someone documents everything. And that's all I had done, quietly, relentlessly, documented. The HOA meeting that month was the smallest I'd seen. Only 9 chairs filled. Karen was there, of course, looking strained, tense, flipping through her binder like it could save her. When county oversight complaint appeared on the agenda, you could feel the weight of it. Karen started with a speech, measured, memorized, performative. She claimed I had created tension in the neighborhood, that I was refusing to cooperate with HOA guidelines, that military contractors were not properly disclosed. Then she made a critical mistake. She said, "We believe the easement may have expired or been misapplied." The board president looked at her sideways. "Karen, we saw the letter from the Department of Defense. It's active." And just like that, her version cracked. The day after the meeting, Jerome sent a second letter, more forceful. The board is required to provide meeting minutes for the emergency vote. We have not received them. If records do not exist, or if a vote was never formally conducted, you must state that in writing. The truth? There had been no vote. Karen had acted alone. Again. The silence on her end confirmed it. That Friday, I got a call from Matt, one of the quieter board members. He kept his voice low, like he thought Karen might be listening from 3 houses away. "I'm not supposed to say this, but some of us didn't know half of what you submitted. She never gave us the base letter, never showed us your documentation. She just said it was classified noise and not worth chasing." There it was. She hadn't just lied to me, she'd lied to the board, and now the county knew it too. By the end of the month, Jerome made his preliminary recommendation. All enforcement actions related to Parcel 1. 37-05-441 are to be suspended effective immediately. The HOA board is instructed to halt further complaints until investigation concludes. Failure to comply may result in administrative penalties. Karen didn't show up to the next board meeting. No explanation, no excuse, just an empty chair and a stack of problems with her name all over them. What Karen never understood is that power doesn't come from title. It comes from trust, from rules that are followed, not twisted, from accountability, from sunlight. She'd ruled by fear for years, but fear only works when no one pushes back. And the moment I did, the county pushed with me. So did the base, so did the board. Even her allies were slipping away, because no one wants to be holding the rope when it snaps. And Karen had tied it all to herself. I knew what she was planning even before the flyer appeared. Karen had gone quiet, but not idle. That's never how people like her operate. They lie low, then lunge. So, when I saw the flyer duct taped to the community mailbox, and it wasn't surprised. Emergency HOA Vote Proposed Amendment. Termination of non-residential and government use rights. Meeting date, Thursday. Location, Ridgeway Community Room. Attendance required for all voting members. No parcel number, no mention of me. But the intent was crystal clear. I took the flyer, scanned it, then sent a copy to Roland. Within an hour, my phone lit up. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. I said nothing. He already knew who she was. This is procedurally invalid 6 different ways. You don't call a structural amendment vote with 3 days' notice. You don't bypass the board process. You don't cite nothing but hearsay as justification. "She knows," I said. "That's not the point." Roland exhaled sharply. "Then we don't stop it, we freeze it. I'll draft a cease and desist. We'll serve the board and file it with the county before a single ballot drops. The hearing officer, a woman in her late 40s named Ms. Reese, opened the session formally. This hearing concerns complaint number 22-771, filed by Mr. Briggs against the Ridgeway HOA and former board president Karen for alleged abuse of process, false enforcement attempts, and misuse of HOA authority. She looked between us. We will allow each side to present. Documents will be entered into record. Witnesses will be heard. You will not interrupt one another. Karen cleared her throat. Understood. Roland nodded. We're ready. Karen went first. She opened her binder and started with a speech, not evidence, not data. A speech. Ridgeway is a quiet, residential community. We have always followed a proud tradition of neighborhood independence, civic engagement, and family values. My actions were only ever intended to protect our streets from being turned into... Objection, Roland said smoothly. This is personal opinion, not relevant to the complaint. Sustained, said Ms. Reese. Stick to the facts, Ms. Space redacted. Karen shifted. She pulled out photos, some I'd seen before, some I hadn't. Blurry shots of unmarked base trucks. Zoomed-in angles of tire tracks. One image of a driver exiting a truck with a badge partially visible. These vehicles do not belong in Ridgeway, Karen said. They raise questions, security concerns. We never approved government use of residential streets. Reese tilted her head. And do you have proof these vehicles were unauthorized? Karen blinked. I have community concerns. Reese didn't flinch. Concerns are not violations. Continue. Then came her printed emails, dozens of them, most from neighbors forwarding rumors, snippets like, "Are we a military zone now?" and "Karen, what's going on with the trucks?" One email, marked as anonymous, read, "This is feeling shady. Are we under surveillance?" Karen circled it in, read. "This is what I was trying to stop," she said. "I was acting on behalf of the community." "And you filed 3 police reports based on these?" Reese asked. Karen hesitated. "Yes, I believed the activity was unlawful." Now it was my turn. Roland stood first. "We'll be submitting Exhibit A through H. That includes the certified easement clause, the DOD usage letter, incident reports from the sheriff's office, and video evidence of sabotage on the complainant's property." He placed the stack on the table. Exhibit 1 is a letter from the Ridgeway board member confirming that the emergency vote was initiated solely by Mr. Redacted, without board consent. He looked up. "We also have a witness prepared to testify." Reese gestured. "Proceed." I stood, spoke carefully, not rehearsed, just real. "My driveway is built across a parcel that includes a legally recorded dual-use easement," I said. "That was signed decades ago and updated when I purchased the home. The Department of Defense uses it sparingly for supply access to a restricted trail bordering federal land." I paused. "It's never interfered with traffic, never endangered residents, and it was all disclosed, on my deed, in the county records, and again during escrow." Reese nodded. "Continue." "In the last several months, Ms. Redacted has initiated 3 police reports, distributed false flyers, called a legally invalid emergency vote, and directly interfered with federal personnel using the easement. She's misrepresented HOA authority, violated procedural rules, and created a hostile living environment for no legal cause." I opened the folder, then held up the signed base commander statement. "This is from Major Evan Sutton. He confirms that the easement is active, authorized, and protected." I handed it across the table. Silence. Reese reviewed the document slowly, then looked up. "Is the base commander?" "Present," a firm voice answered from the back row. "Yes, ma'am." Everyone turned. Major Sutton stood, dressed in uniform. Not full dress, but enough to command attention. "I'm here voluntarily, and I can confirm that Mr. Briggs has cooperated fully with all DOD coordination. The easement is vital for non-public logistical movement and has existed, undisputed, since 1994. He stepped forward. "We made the mistake of assuming local knowledge of the easement would prevent conflict. It did not. I now have a standing instruction for all future access to route through the proper chain, and to avoid any civilian confrontation." He turned to Karen. "But let me be clear. Mr. Redacted approached one of my drivers on foot and demanded ID while standing on Mr. Briggs's property. That's not an HOA action. That's trespassing. Karen's face flushed. I didn't. No, Reese cut in. You'll have a chance to respond. She looked back to Sutton. Thank you, Major. He nodded, then sat. The last to speak was Officer Reyes, called in as a neutral party. He recounted the third report, the one where Karen said I was hosting unauthorized government activity. I reviewed the easement documents. I confirmed the base's involvement. I told Ms. Karen her reports lacked basis, he said plainly. Reese folded her hands. Did she acknowledge that? Reyes hesitated. She did not. By the end, Karen wasn't flipping through her binder anymore. She was silent, still, waiting for a lifeline that wouldn't come. Reese closed her notes. We'll issue a written recommendation within 10 business days, she said. However, based on preliminary review, I advise that the Ridgeway HOA suspend all enforcement actions related to Mr. Briggs' property until further notice. She turned to Karen, and that Ms. Karen refrain from initiating any additional reports until this matter is fully resolved. Continued action may be deemed harassment. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. Outside the building, Roland clapped me lightly on the shoulder. That, he said, was a clean takedown. I nodded, but I wasn't smiling, because the goal was never humiliation. It was peace, and peace never comes easy, especially when someone like Karen holds the reins for too long. But now those reins were slipping, and the county had its hands on them. The email arrived early, no subject line, just a PDF attached, from County HOA, Oversight Division. Time, 6:12 a.m. I clicked it before the coffee even finished brewing. Findings and determination, complaint number 22-771. After full review, the County HOA Oversight Division finds that the Ridgeway HOA violated administrative procedure during the attempted emergency vote. Enforcement actions against Mr. Briggs lacked legal basis and violated HOA authority limits. The HOA board failed to exercise oversight over then President Karen, whose conduct constituted an abusive position. Accordingly, the Ridgeway HOA is fined $7,500 for procedural violations. All attempted actions regarding Parcel 1, 37-05-441 are void. Karen is formally censured and barred from holding any board office in Ridgeway for a minimum of 5 years. I stared at the screen, not surprised, not elated, just still. Vague warnings about unmonitored access and community safety. I turned it over. Nothing on the back, just fear in paper form. I took it inside, photographed it, then shredded it. The smear campaign had begun. That evening, I got a message from a neighbor. A guy named Aaron lived 3 doors down with 2 toddlers and a wife who taught 3rd grade. He'd never reached out before. His email was short. Just a heads up. Karen's been telling people you're leasing part of your lot to the government. Said it's not properly zoned for what you're doing. I figured that sounded off. Let me know if you need someone to back you up. Attached was a screenshot of a Facebook group thread, Ridgeway Community Strong, where Karen had posted a cryptic comment about federal activities slipping through our HOA cracks. It didn't mention my name, but the comment directly referenced my address. That night, I installed my own cameras. Not many, just enough. One pointed at the driveway entrance, another covering the mailbox, a third mounted near the rear fence line facing the easement. All legal, all with signs posted. This property is monitored by video surveillance. I wasn't trying to start a war. I was fortifying the perimeter. Karen had escalated. She'd crossed the line from passive-aggressive policy policing into active defamation. And I wasn't going to let her do it in the dark. 3 days later, I got a call from a base contractor I worked with, Derek, a logistics handler, who'd done 3 tours before joining civil ops. He sounded irritated. "Your HOA lady tried to stop me," he said. "What?" "Middle-aged woman, short haircut, sunglasses. Said she was the HOA president. Asked what I was doing on private infrastructure. Demanded ID, said I was trespassing. Where? Right at the mouth of the trail, just past your lot line. I told her I had clearance and she said, that doesn't matter here. Tried to take a picture of my plates. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, vision narrowing. Did you report it? Yeah, logged it with the base liaison. She might have put herself on a list she didn't mean to. Send me a statement? Already typed it up. I read his incident report twice before printing it. Clear, factual, time-stamped. It documented not just her interference, but her false claim of authority on a federal use trail. It went into the binder, right next to the flyer, right after the photo of her smile. This wasn't about easements anymore. It wasn't even about the base. This was Karen doing what people like her always do when they lose control. They escalate. They create panic, then position themselves as the solution. She thought if she painted me as a threat, quiet, subtle, unnerving, then her rules would feel like safety. And she wasn't just targeting me, she was shaping the narrative for everyone else. So, I started writing. A full incident log. Each day, each camera sighting, each violation notice, each third-party report. I cataloged everything: date, time, location, source. I drafted a summary cover sheet and clipped it to the top. Then, I printed 5 clean copies, 1 for my files, 1 for the base, 1 for the HOA board, 1 for my lawyer, and 1 for the county oversight division. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I always knew I'd need it. The paper trail. Not just the signed deed or the glossy survey printout the realtor handed me at closing, but the real documentation. The stack of cross-referenced easements, service agreements, and old municipal overlays that nobody ever reads until they're backed into a corner. Karen had backed me into one. I just didn't think she'd do it this fast. It was late, nearly midnight. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the whir of my printer and the soft creak of my chair as I leaned over the desk, flipping pages under the pale light of a single desk lamp. The binder sat open beside me. Ridgeway property, easement and title docs. Most people never even see these pages, let alone understand them. But I wasn't most people. 20 years working infrastructure for the military had trained me to respect the fine print. Sometimes the only thing standing between authority and overreach is a clause that nobody noticed, but someone signed. I was banking on that now. I started with the purchase file, page 12, parcel YD, number 137-05-441. I double-checked it against the plat map I'd pulled from the county site. The borders matched. Property edge ran along the old utility corridor, now used as a gravel access trail for maintenance, and, more recently, low-visibility base logistics vehicles. Karen kept calling it a road, but it wasn't a road. It was a recorded dual-use utility easement, and legally, that was a different beast entirely. I flipped further back, scanning through the original grant language from the 1998 development filing. There it was. Section 3.2, subsection F. The property shall retain utility easement rights for maintenance access, including ingress/egress by federal and emergency vehicles, as authorized under logistical cooperation agreements, with the U.S. Department of Defense or its contractors. Right of use is perpetual and non-revocable by any private covenant, including homeowners' associations, and shall be maintained by the deed holder unless otherwise specified. I let out a slow breath and sat back in the chair. She didn't know. Karen had weaponized bylaws, flyers, fear, and surveillance. But she didn't know about this. At closing, I remembered signing a supplemental document recertifying easement acknowledgments. At the time, it felt like routine paperwork, a formality. Now, it felt like armor. I located the scanned version in my digital archive, signed by me, notarized, with a current map overlay from the base confirming active status. The route was clearly marked, touching the back edge of my property and listed as an alternate logistics corridor, ALC-3B. Not used daily, not public-facing, but real and entirely legal. Next, I cross-referenced the county recorder's site, just to be sure. Within minutes, I found the file number, scanned into the public archive, time-stamped with the 1998 land use approval, and updated with my name in the property change log from 6 months ago. I saved it all. PDFs, screenshots, date confirmations. Then I printed, then I highlighted. Karen wanted a target. She just gave me a map. The next morning, I drove into town. It was one of those pale gray mornings that never fully burns off. Sky the color of old concrete, air cool, the sun hiding behind clouds like it didn't want to be involved in what I was about to do. The county building wasn't much. I didn't plan to attend, not because I wasn't welcome, but because I didn't need to fight anymore. Sometimes the best victory is not having to raise your voice again. A week before Thanksgiving, I got a letter in the mail from Jerome Lynn, the county investigator. Short, personal. Mr. Briggs, just wanted to say, yours was one of the cleanest, most thoroughly documented complaints I've seen in years. People like Karen count on neighbors getting emotional. You didn't. That's why the system worked. I tucked it into the fireproof box, right beside the base easement agreement, and the formal censure, and the photo of the flyer Karen never thought I'd keep. Sometimes I wonder what she thinks now, if she ever regrets it. If she tells herself she was right, even after the county said otherwise. If she scrolls through Ridgway's site from some condo in another county, still trying to find a fight to pick. But I don't dwell on it, because that kind of thinking, that hunger for control, is what drove her in the first place. And I didn't come here to feed it. I came here to breathe. The irony of it all? Karen thought the driveway was power, that controlling it meant controlling the street, the neighborhood, me. But it was never about concrete or gravel. It was about space, boundaries, lawful lines drawn long before she moved in. Lines she thought she could erase with a binder and a microphone. But now those lines are permanent, stamped into title, acknowledged by county, respected by base, and walked over daily by no one but me. I stood at the edge of the easement one morning, boots crunching dry leaves, watching a small logistics van roll slowly down the trail and disappear into the trees. No sirens, no suspicion, no Karen, just quiet coordination. The way it was always meant to be. My driveway isn't long, but every foot of it is mine, paid for, protected, proven. And in the end, that's what matters. Not who yells the loudest, but who stands their ground, one silent truth at a time.